Hello, everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. I'm your co-host, Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers, here in three dimensions with the amazing Bridget McCormack, president and CEO of the American Arbitration Association. Bridget, we're in person.
It's so exciting to do this in person for the very first time and to be in Philadelphia, which I adore. So
It's always sunny here.
it is always sunny, even today, even though it's -1.
And we also had a chance to meet our wonderful producer, Aaron Tran, who's here in person and arranged for us to find a lovely spot to record our episode today.
Aaron is amazing.
He's the best. Thank you, Aaron. So today we're really excited because a few reports have come out recently, a few reports on the state of the jobs landscape generally, and then an interesting report about legal in particular. And because both of us are really, really interested in how AI will impact jobs and the future of the legal profession, we thought this would be a great episode to host in person. And as always, although we are in person, we will continue our format of starting with our AI ahas, the things that we have used AI for that are magical since our last recording, and then share a definition in this interesting new world of AI of something that people might want to familiarize themselves with. And then we'll jump into the main topic today, which is covering the World Economic Forum's jobs report for 2025 and the Thomson Reuters and the Georgetown Center for Ethics in the Legal Profession report on the state of the legal market for 2025. So, Bridget, I'll turn it to you to kick us off with the AI ahas because I've been talking for a while, but you always have really interesting ways that you're using AI. Can you share something you've used it for since our last?
One of the reasons I'm here in Philadelphia this week is the American Law Institute Council, which is the sort of governing board of the American Law Institute, meets here in Philadelphia this week on Thursday and Friday. And I was elected to the council last May. I've been a member of the ALI since 2012. The ALI, of course, is the organization that tries to bring some clarity and transparency to, different legal areas. So they issue these restatements of law, which courts and scholars and lawyers rely on to kind of understand what the legal principles are in a particular area. Apparently at the council meeting, we will be discussing many drafts of restatements. And I get to give a little intro speech to the council as to who I am, and why I'm here, which is a good question, really, honestly. But I decided to brainstorm a little bit with my friend, actually a couple of my friends. I did it with Claude and with GPT about the history of the ALI and what were the sort of founding members of the ALI concerned about. Because it feels to me like right now that my main familiarity is with the restatements. Mm-hmm. And when I was a judge, I did rely on them quite a bit. They're quite helpful resources to understand, especially a new area of law where you don't have any background. But they're very dense, and they're just denser every year, right? Because there's so many different common law jurisdictions that take the law in different directions, and the ALI does a really nice job keeping track of all that. But it's no longer, in my view, I don't know if it ever was, a resource that people other than smart lawyers and judges probably can get a lot out of. And it seems to me that there might be some opportunities with the generative AI tools for thinking about ways the ALI could update some of its services and offerings that are consistent with its founding mission by using generative AI. And you would not be surprised to know that Claude and GPT had lots of great ideas, and they think it's a very exciting project.
Good.
Yeah, a very exciting project to think about the ways that the ALI might use generative AI with its resources to basically bring even more clarity and transparency and information about legal rights and responsibilities to people, even people who are not lawyers. So I have a bunch of those ideas. I'm going to try them out and see how they go. I'll let you know.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you have any one that you'd be willing to share?
There are lots of ways in which, if the ALI wanted to, the technology could clearly be used to simplify what the restatements now do in plain language, in any language, right? So you could imagine producing resources that were basically restatements for non-lawyers that would be very simple. And the chatbots have lots of creative names for these. If you wanted to be, if your interest was to make sure that you're bringing, clarity and transparency to what the rule of law is, what it requires of you, what it provides for you, it's a great technology for doing that. I guess I'll have to learn a little bit about like the funding model and how much they count on like their statements for income, but still,
Details.
I mean,
New markets.
When it was founded, it was the founders here at the University of Pennsylvania, and it was founded by like foundations funded the project, and they were like, we have law just going all over the place out there in all these states, and we really need to bring some clarity. And it was a pro bono effort, really. It wasn't a like money-making effort, and it's still a nonprofit. So I don't think that's I don't mean to like be hung up on like the funding model, but obviously we'd have to figure that out.
At that period, like 100 years ago, is so fascinating.
It is.
Because I know the AAA emerged 100
Yep.
years ago, ALI, Practicing Law Institute.
Yep.
It was this whole era of such complexity and also such entrepreneurial spirit among lawyers, right?
And collaboration. The ALI was actually like a collaboration between academics, judges, and practicing lawyers. And it was the first time there was that kind of like overlapping stakeholder collaboration around something that everybody was like, we have to do something about this. Like we can't just have like different rules of law, growing up all around the country. Like we need to bring some clarity and have some understanding of what the basics are. And so it's a good model, I feel like, for that collaboration piece of it. The collaborative piece of it is a good model for what's possible right now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I feel like you work on a lot of different projects around leveraging AI. I'm involved in some projects. Do you envision that this era of the profession will have some sort of lasting collaborative efforts emerge?
I feel like it certainly could, and it's my hope that it will. I do think, you hear me talk about stakeholder silos and how they really don't serve us, and I think they have disserved us in solving a lot of our big problems in the profession. And I think they will really disserve us if we want to figure out how to make sure that AI transforms the legal profession for the better and the practice of law for the better, not just for lawyers, but for the people we serve. And I don't think we're going to get there without breaking down those silos. So I have big hopes that maybe it's the 100-year anniversary of all of that collaborative innovation, and we can do it again. Like, now's the time.
That's very cool. And the other group that emerged during the same period that we'll talk about today are law firms and their modern sort of embodiment, developed in response to all of this complexity as well, and are serving their clients in really interesting and dynamic ways right now too. So very interesting, this like echo through time 100 years later.
Yeah.
That's a very cool use case.
It's another one of those like creative partner. Like, I mean, I won't bore the listeners with it, but like, we got into like some deep rabbit holes with like, I was like, well, wait a minute, why wouldn't the ALI be exactly the right leader to, and it was fun. I like the thought partner aspect of these tools for me. Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah. How about you?
Mine's so boring in comparison. And we talked before hitting record that I'm going to work on saving my most creative use cases because I forget about them by the time we get here. But because I was cramming and trying to prep for today, I used the use case that I used for today's episode, which was using Google's deep research tool, which I love, to prep for today's episode. The World Economic Forum report in particular, which was lengthy, and we really wanted to do a high-level summary. So I asked Google Gemini Deep Research to surface the report and any sort of surrounding editorials about it, particularly weaknesses in the report that I was interested in, and did the whole thing where it generated its research plan, and then I made some edits to it. And I think it's just a very cool use case for anybody.
It's incredible. I mean, I've used that tool, I don't know, a few times a week for the last couple of weeks. It's really a great tool. Yeah.
So my challenge next time, maybe I'll ask AI tonight.
Like, what are some cool things I can do with you, friend? Yeah.
How provocative.
I thought I could ask you the definition question this week. Persona prompting. What is persona prompting? What do we mean by that?
So persona prompting, and I know you have done this in very interesting ways, including this is a little bit deeper version of persona prompting when you actually created a custom GPT of Frances Keller, the founder of the AAA, and engaged in conversation with her. But persona prompting, as I understand it, really refers to asking the AI to adopt a persona and then interacting with the persona that you've asked it to adopt. So it's really helpful in getting different perspectives. I think it's helpful for lawyers in preparing for things like oral argument, or I did a workshop with a group of lawyers where they were analyzing a hypothetical RFP, law firm lawyers, RFP from a corporate client, and had them do persona prompting and say, I'm a GC of a higher ed institution. Here's what's in the four corners of the document, but what are things that I might not have put in here that a modern day GC of a big university would be thinking about?
Right.
And that led the lawyers to sort of think more deeply about different services that they could offer that go beyond the scope of the RFP, but really show how empathetic and intuitive they can be in understanding the client. So I love persona prompting. I use it all the time, and definitely encourage others to use it. But the reason that I picked this definition this week is because I was with you and many of your team last week filming a project that you and your team have built together. And your colleague, Jason Cabrera, who's your AI enablement professional, was talking about persona prompting during the project. So I also thought today's topic really lends itself nicely to sharing a little bit about the project. So if you would be open to sharing what you're building.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. I mean, as you know well, Jen, because you're my confidant on throughout this whole process, and my frequent collaborator, we've been diving into how generative AI is going to affect our core business as well as our operations for almost 2 years now. And I've said many times, I'm lucky that I inherited a team and a program that already had a structured innovation program. So we had a great place to build out some of what that change management looked like, even though, nobody really knew what it was going to mean for all of us when we started. And we just started a number of different work streams and then processes and then put some governance around it and built out what in retrospect looks like a pretty great way to approach change management for a legacy legal organization trying to figure out what generative AI is going to mean for your business. And we think it's now pretty useful for other legal organizations, law firms in particular, but probably also in-house departments, in-house teams, and even law schools. I mean, I've been asked to talk to enough law firms, often with you, and in-house legal teams about what we're doing, and I've had many of them say, can you put that together in a course and come teach us how you did it? And finally, after enough of them said that, I was like, well, maybe we can. We have an education a line of education products and services, and so we do education around alternative dispute resolution. Why not around this particular kind of change management for legal organizations approaching generative AI and what that means for their business? And I'm excited about it. Jason is featured, but so are a lot of my other team members, all of whom have been great sports along for a really interesting ride. And we're pretty proud of what we've built and excited to talk about it. We're gonna announce it during Legal Week in New York at the end of March. So I'm very excited to talk more about it as we release it.
Yeah, you should be so proud and so excited. You were so early to jump on this, and as you said, you have an incredible team and an incredible structure that lent itself to really moving quickly.
Yeah.
And now that you're 2 years in, and we'll talk today about law firms and their challenge for 2025, and just to spoil it a little bit, about half of firms, only half, have sort of started to elevate Gen AI strategy to the C-suite level or leadership level. So I know that a lot of people out there in our industry will be looking for guidance, like the guidance that your team has created. So maybe we can jump in generally and talk about the challenge around upskilling, the challenges ahead in the jobs market, the opportunities, and helpfully the World Economic Forum recently created a really detailed report about what it sees as the future of the jobs market. So would you be open to walking us through, Bridget, a couple of the key findings?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about this report, but in some ways I don't think it's surprising, and probably won't be surprising for most of our listeners. In fact, maybe they've already heard about it or seen it in their social media feeds. But the World Economic Forum report drew on the perspectives of over 1,000 leading global employers that represent more than 14 million workers across 55 economies, I believe, and 22 industry clusters. So a very large group of employers contributed to the findings and the trends. And the trends are what you might think if you've been following the news or reading anything in the last couple of years. The rapid advancements in AI and technology in general are transforming industries at a pace that nobody really saw coming. And it's creating both lots of new jobs and displacing others. Interestingly, they forecast more jobs being created than displaced, which doesn't mean there aren't significant change management issues for those of us who want to make sure that we can upskill or reskill or co-skill our awesome staffs. There is a lot of work ahead, but I think it makes it more exciting, and it underscores something that I think you say a lot in presentations, that the only bad thing to do right now is nothing. If you're a leader of an organization, because this change, it's a cacophony at this point, and you can't ignore it. And so the only mistake you can make is to just think you can keep ignoring it. And I think that this report, just because of its breadth and its depth, makes that really clear. I will say that our friends on the AI podcast, Paul Reitzer made a really good point, which was that the people responding to this survey instrument, or however they gathered the information, it's probably the case that many of them don't even fully understand how quickly things are changing. They're probably not super users of the technology or super followers of the leaders in the space. They're not trying to interpret Sam Altman's 3 a.m. tweets like we all, like I am. And so if anything, the responses might be not serious enough or not appreciating enough how quickly things are changing. So with that in mind, some of it I think is not surprising. The report predicts an increase of 78 million jobs globally by 2030. So that's a pretty short timeline, with 170 million new roles created and 92 displaced. So that, again, to me, seems like good news. I know scary news with all the change management, but good news overall. There is a lot of work to do, and there's going to be some education needed to get people ready for those new jobs. The roles that companies are going to need are AI specialists, machine learning specialists, data specialists, engineers, and business intelligence analysts. So these might not be traditional jobs that many people have trained for, but they're trainable jobs. And the kinds of jobs that are probably going to go away are clerical roles in all different kinds of industries, including legal. In this particular report, they called legal officers as one of the jobs that was on the chopping block. I'm not sure what that means, but it sounds like judges, or maybe lawyers. I don't know. Lawyers are officers of the court. True. And judges are kind of I don't know. It sounds like legal jobs are potentially impacted, and I think that's of course right. They're clearly going to be impacted, but I think like the rest of the industries, there will be more work created. There's going to be plenty of work to do. It's the getting from here to there, which is what we've been talking about, I feel like, for many months now, and we're going to have to keep talking about, but I think everybody else should be talking about it at this point as well. One of the other interesting things about the report, which is something I love listening to you present on, is the kinds of skills that are going to matter for the future. If you're thinking about what your workers' core skills need to be by 2030, because you want to figure out how to upskill or reskill or co-skill, what are the skills that you want to be training people to do? What are the human skills that are going to matter in the coming years? And again, I don't think this is happening tomorrow. I mean, it took, I've said this before, it took, I think, people 10 years to get on the elevator after it was built. But, the elevator makers didn't go away in those 10 years. They hung in there. They're doing okay now. So
they did. Yeah. And it looks like our tech friends are going to hang
They're going to hang in there.
They seem like they're committed to this.
I think they're going to stick with it.
I think so.
Yeah. So what are the human skills that people should be thinking about?
Yeah. And you mentioned how long the lag time can be in a technology emerging and, broad adoption of that technology. But in the report, it says that just under 40% of workers' core skills are expected to change by 2030. So we're at 2025 now. I mean, that's nearing half of the skills that workers bring to the table in the next 5 years. It seems like such an enormous change. And like you, I'm really excited about all the opportunities it creates, particularly to do things that are much more interesting and creative than things that we've done in the past. But I also think that it requires real leadership at the educational level, at the organizational level. And I think it's too easy right now to put your head in the sand and still be maybe not skeptical, like maybe deep down you believe it, but just not sure what to do or not interested in doing it. And so I'm also going to echo Paul Reitzer, who for the first time, I think in the last podcast episode, said that he recognizes how hard it is to change jobs. But if you're working in an organization that has no AI strategy, like you should really consider moving to a company that does. And I think for the second part of our conversation today for law firms, one of the biggest things on the horizon, I think, is how a bifurcated landscape where some firms are addressing AI and actively talking about it versus the other half right now that aren't. If I'm somebody graduating from law school, I can see all around me what the future is. I'm not going to be interested in going to a firm that has no AI strategy in place. So in addition to the AI strategy and all the tech skills that will be required in understanding data and privacy and cloud computing and all of those things, I think the really exciting thing, and the thing I know we both share an affinity for, are humans and the skills that they bring to the table. So the report really highlights that these skills will continue to be important: analytical thinking and innovation, complex problem solving, creativity, originality, and initiative, and active learning and learning strategies, which I also love. I just think metacognition and understanding how to become a lifelong learner are things we're relatively late to as a profession in terms of our skills, not necessarily in terms of understanding the law, which we're constantly following, but our business models, our skills, and the way that we sort of bring ourselves to the engagement. And the social emotional skills that will be even more important are leadership and social influence. And we'll talk a little bit about this, about what we see in leadership in law firms and legal organizations. I love resilience and stress tolerance and flexibility. And I'll again cite the Larry Richard research about lawyers' low sociability and resilience and tolerance for change and how much of a challenge that will be, and emotional intelligence. So, I think the exciting news is that those attributes become even more important if we can leverage skills that allow us to understand how technology augments. And I know you talk about this all the time, how it augments and does not replace human beings.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting period, I think, especially for people I think there are actually a lot of lawyers who had these skills or have them and have them sort of maybe didn't get to build that muscle as much during law school or even after. And it should be exciting for, I know a lot of these people. I know them in law firms. I know, they're my friends. And I think this is their moment, man. It's going to be a fun transition. I promise.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And all those innovators who have felt sort of constrained,
shut down,
shut down, asked to move toward the exit because there were, to be fair to firms and other organizations, there really was not an imperative to be innovative, and innovation could have been a risk to your firm. And I think we're entering an era where it's a risk not to be innovative, and I think that's very cool.
Yeah.
So maybe we can dive into the 2025 Thomson Reuters and Georgetown Center on Ethics in the Legal Profession report on the state of the legal market. I will just start by taking the opportunity to note that this is Jim Jones's final report. He sadly passed unexpectedly in December and was such a wonderful leader in the profession and chair of the Pro Bono Institute. And I looked forward to reading this report every year. When I first started teaching the legal profession.
Oh, it was a resource that you relied on.
Oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
My co-teacher for that class very well, Marielle Stashevsky, who will be cringing that I said her name out loud. But she and I co-taught law firm business models, and I was brand new. And she sent me the Georgetown State of the Legal Market report, and we invited Jim Jones to come to our class.
Oh, great.
And I really did not know who he was because I was not from this world. And I remember Marielle introducing him to the students and going over his very impressive background. And he was so humble and understated. And she would say, "You guys, this is like a really big deal that Jim Jones is here." And she was so right. And every year he would build the whole presentation from scratch for us, would stay after and answer every student's question, and was just a wonderful writer. So
Amazing.
We're very sad at his passing. But it was really interesting to read this report, which, like you said about the World Economic Forum report, is probably not unexpected in its predictions. Its main prediction being that technology will come to define the legal market over the next 5 to 10 years. But what's interesting to me about the report is some of its findings around what 2024 looked like for law firms. Long story short, it looked very, very rosy for law firms across almost every practice area.
Yeah.
Higher billing rates and higher realization rates, which is not always the case, and practices that included transactional practices that we saw the entire 2010s, but also the sort of coexistence of success of countercyclical practices like litigation and bankruptcy and labor and employment. And you frequently see those as a seesaw, right?
Yeah.
But they're all active and successful at the moment. I think the changing geopolitics mean that they will become even more active on both fronts.
Yeah. Just following how the banks did in Q4 of 2024 and all of the what seems to be like pent up energy around M&A, I think the kinds of things that businesses need law firms to do and people need law firms to do are only, up and to the right. I think that's also going to be true for disputes. I mean, we keep meaning to get to this episode where we're going to talk about the ways in which the barriers to filing lawsuits or filing demands for arbitration are falling away given technology. So I think like the kinds of things people need lawyers for are just going to keep growing. I mean, the animal spirits are back in the market, and we're just like lawyers are going to be off to the races. It's how they do what they do that probably has to change in the meantime. I think it's a rough recipe for any law firm leader or legal organization leader solving for the innovator's dilemma, right? Because the work is just everywhere. And what you've done historically has always worked. And it'll probably work this year. It'll probably work fine in 2025. Maybe 2026. I don't know if it's going to work in 2028 if, legal tech has, grown to a point where new models now work, right?
No, I totally agree. And the innovator's dilemma and being structured around what made you innovative in the first place. To our earlier point, these firms emerged 100 years ago, and the leveraged labor model they created to respond to all of the complexity was their innovation. And then in the intervening decades, the billable hour emerged as the primary way of charging for services. And they're structured as partnerships, which is super rare in a world where your organizations are no longer, a dozen partners who've known one another their entire lives and can have handshake type deals. You have thousands of people, many of whom you'll
around
never
the globe.
meet. Yeah.
Around the globe.
In other countries all around the globe. And you're essentially acting as solo practices under the shared brand of your firm.
Yeah.
But the other challenge that creates is that it's a short-sighted model for how you distribute profits, because everybody looks to the profits per equity partner at the end of the year. And it's a very hard model for leaders to convince their partners that they should take some of the bounty that they've accumulated over the past year and invest it in an unknown future in some ways.
Right.
Because there's so much lateral movement now. And so you do that and you take, I don't even know how much money some of these people make, so I'm not even going to try to guess because it'll make me sad.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. So if you're going to convince an equity partner to take some of their lot and invest it in the future, I can understand why that equity partner would say, you know what, this is just the same as practicing with this other firm that's not asking me to give up from my distribution to do this. And
especially since they have like sort of limited time. I mean, most law firms, sort of give you an incentive to move out when you're 65 at the latest. That's, it's kind of the way the model works. And you're probably earning at your peak partnership share close to then. So you almost never have the incentives don't always align with like building for the innovators, solving the innovator's dilemma. It's just, it's really complicated, I think.
No, it's like if you had a design challenge to work against solving for the innovator's dilemma, a law firm would be the thing that you would construct.
Yes.
Because and you hear this all the time at any reception after a presentation at a law firm, your most senior partners will say, I'm so happy that I'm not going to be part of this and have to worry. My in-laws, many of whom work in law firms, say this to me all the time because I corner them at family events and talk about this and terrify them.
And they mostly try to run away from you now?
Yes.
Because it's all you talk about?
Totally.
I know the feeling. Yeah. I know the feeling. Yeah.
And so the leadership challenge here is huge. And then you have these mid-sized firms, all of whom are merging. One of the other trends that came up is the reliance so many GCs have on going back to firms that they are used to, but also their increasing need for global footprints in their firms and global expertise. So you have firms that are smaller where they have a cultural advantage to figuring this out, but the economics mean that they're forced to merge with a totally different group.
Right.
And all of those integration challenges that go with it. So that's a challenge. And then the other thing I thought was interesting in the report is how COVID sort of shook up a longstanding budgetary framework that law firms use, much of which was allocated to traveling to see clients, to wining and dining recruits. I know on-campus interviews are no longer in person. They're all over Zoom now, and that was an expense. And during COVID, it started to shift away from those three-dimensional human investments into technology. Yeah. And tech has increasingly outpaced tech investment has increasingly outpaced inflation in law firms. And so the report sort of talks about how that trend will continue, and there'll be this new need for investment in strategic leadership of Gen AI strategies and in upskilling the people at your law firm.
Yep.
So a lot to think about, none of which is really surprising, I think, but all of which is not easy to solve for.
Leaders who get excited by these kind of challenges should be like waking up exciting with their brain exploding every single day, especially given the position they're in, both with how well they've done the last year or two, actually, and then all of the incoming work that's coming to them. They have the resources right now, if they want to really build a team to figure out this transformation, right? And I, you know me, I'm a believer in actually building like a separate team to lead a transformation. It's really, nothing kills innovation like success, right? If you do one thing really successfully, it's really hard to figure out why you would not do that thing tomorrow. But they're in a great position to do it. And so I hope there are enough leaders out there in the legal profession that wake up excited every day thinking about what this will look like. Because I do think we come out of it with a much better profession, like a profession that people will really love going into and staying in for their whole careers, and telling their kids to go into. I mean, I think there's all good news ahead if we manage it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you're a law firm leader, you couldn't ask to be in a better position during this moment, to have just come off of a hugely successful year where, according to the report, every practice area you have, your partners should be pretty happy with how they're doing. And you have sort of indicators in our industry that I think other industries don't have. Yeah. Things like the size of your summer associate class and those around you as harbingers of things to come. And we've talked about this in presentations. We will be somewhat slower in adapting than other industries for lots of good reasons. But you have the total opportunity, like you said, to define a vision for what you want the future of your firm to be, to leverage those powers of persuasion that you have as a top-notch lawyer, and to chart a vision and ask people to come with you. What other attributes do you think a leader needs to have? And conversely, which types of leaders from the past who were very successful at the top of these organizations do you think may be on their way out or not as sought after?
Yeah. I think some of the skills that leaders need right now to manage the change that's ahead are things like curiosity and courage. I mean, I can't tell you how many times you will say to talented senior people that you work with that we're doing this crazy thing. We're going to figure out how this new technology is going to transform our business, and people will look at you like you're nuts. And so you have to have like some courage of your convictions. I think emotional intelligence and like the ability to manage people in new roles. Like where can you see where Jason Cabrera might fit tomorrow? Like how can you see how your team might look in the organization of your future? And those are not necessarily the kinds of skills that maybe leaders of legal organizations were recruited for historically. But I think they're going to be critical. There's probably others. You probably see other traits that.
No, it's like you took the slide in my presentation.
Well, maybe I watched
leadership.
Your presentation.
No. The only one that I would add that I think is really hard for lawyers, and I think they make it harder than it needs to be, is humility.
Yeah.
I think law firm partners are accustomed to being the subject matter experts, and they are sought after because they know everything about a given area.
Yeah.
And for many, I think this is uncomfortable because there's no clear answer as to what happens next. But I think that's liberating. I think being able to say, I don't know what happens next, but I know that what happens next is going to be different than what happened before. And here are the things that we can do as a community to learn together.
Yeah. So that we're ready for when it happens, like we're prepared. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that should be a relatively easy case for a talented leader of a law firm to make.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be something that's uncomfortable. And also reaching out to clients and saying, I think this window is rapidly shutting, but saying we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we believe the future will be different and we want to co-design it with you.
Yeah.
We've talked about this in other contexts, but I think right now there are opportunities for these firms that have really strong innovation programs and Gen AI leadership to be offering some of that as a service to their clients, many of whom have small legal teams and don't have the ability to think through what all of this means.
Right. They don't have the time or the resources, but they know they need to do it.
Yeah. And imagine having a firm that reaches out and saying, we've developed this AI academy, or we're working on workshopping different pilot projects, and we'd love you to come in and send some of your team to give us feedback and also to learn with us.
Yeah.
I think that would be really well received. But I think to the point about the innovator's dilemma, people are so focused on what they need to do today, it's really hard to find the bandwidth to make that happen.
Yeah. I think it's very hard for lawyers to blue sky, anything. for really, I think, good reasons, like cultural and legal reasons. We are so wedded to what's happened before that it is very hard to say, like, but what if we weren't bound by any of that? Like, what could it look like? And I find for me that's one of the ways that it helps me to do that is to talk to people on my team who are not lawyers. Also not always comfortable for lawyers to have like non-lawyers who are equal partners in designing their future together. But I mean, you've talked to Diana from my team, who's not a lawyer, but she's a brilliant thinker. I mean, she's also our chief innovation and information officer. She runs our engineering department, so she's a talented technologist, but she's much more than a technologist, right? She's a like super strategic thinker. Yeah, she's a strategist. And she's an amazing thought partner with me in a way that I worry, that if I didn't have a Diana, like if I was only talking to lawyers all the time, would it be harder to see what a blue sky future looks like, right?
Yeah, and I think people who have entrepreneurial mindset right now are super excited. Like I wake up every morning and it's like, I wish I could use AI to clone myself so that I could look at 10 different things all day long and figure out what they mean. And in my life, I went from spending 20 years surrounded by lawyers and professors and judges to being a small business owner and going to events for entrepreneurs. And it is fascinating.
Night and day.
Oh my gosh. Like everything is possibility. And I think that the blend of the two, right? Like blue sky thinking that is deliberative and involves critical thought is the unlock here.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's a cultural change for lawyers to recognize that they're not the only ones that bring value to the table.
And I think the ones that realize that will have a leg up. I really do think you need people other than lawyers at your strategy table. You really do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we'll just end by saying that if law needs some evidence that they should take this seriously, this upskilling and leadership, we had some statistics here from Microsoft. Brad Smith from Microsoft wrote a really interesting piece called The Golden Opportunity for American AI. And in it, he talks about how Microsoft alone in 2025 alone has pledged to train 2.5 million American students, workers, and community members with AI skills for new jobs, pursuing new careers, and building new businesses. And there are lots of other sort of statistics about investments from companies like Amazon and all the other big tech companies. And I always look to them, not necessarily to emulate them, but as a signal as to where we're headed in the jobs landscape. So I thought that was really interesting. And my big takeaways from all of this is that 2025, like you said, it might not look that different in terms of the data that we see next year. And it might not feel that different to a lawyer day to day. Mm-hmm. But to me, it feels like a pivotal year where leaders in firms, in corporate legal, everywhere, have to make a choice as to whether they're going to try to adhere to the old world and hope that they make it to retirement, I guess. Mm-hmm. Or they're going to read the writing on the wall and develop a strong strategy and guide their firm into the future, which sounds like a lot more fun to me. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you just texted me that this, like, the New York Times broke this afternoon that the president is going to be announcing a $100 billion investment, and I guess it's mostly AI infrastructure, but that kind of investment to make sure, America maintains its lead in this, this general purpose technology that's going to change the world, together with the kinds of announcements like the one from Brad Smith. And I feel like we heard another one from OpenAI as well about just investment in general education around AI literacy. I mean, the rest of the world's going to figure it all out. And, I guess maybe they'll stay away from the law books, but those meta glasses, like you can go in the library and just like take pictures of all the laws. So like, I feel like I'd rather have the lawyers like leading what this looks like in legal. And so I'm excited for what happens in legal, in strategy, and thinking about what might be possible in 2025. I do think we'll see some big changes.
Same. This was such a fun conversation. And thanks to everybody out there for listening. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of 2030 Vision, AI, and the Future of Law. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.